and the winner of this contest will be the UFC's all-time winner.
You heard it from Bruce, the all-time winningest winner in UFC history. It's 8'10", Jim Miller. He's the fights leader. He's the wins leader. He's taking on the Great Ape, Alexander Hernandez, a guy who made it close to the bottom of our list on the MMA nickname tier list. The Great was his original nickname. He added Ape onto the end of it, and he's been anything but a Great Ape since he's changed his nickname. Because for Hernandez in his last two fights, took on Renato Moicano, got finished in that fight. He got rocked, he got socked, he got choked out. And his last time out against Billy Quarantillo, you look at the number on the page, or you look at the letters, and they read out, well, he lost by TKO, standing TKO knockout loss. But you got to go back and watch the fight because Hernandez, it was his first fight in all of them. Now he's had 19 at featherweight. So it was, I'm moving down. I'm going to make the plunge. I'm going to be a featherweight now. He dipped his toes in that pool. It was too cold. He's going back up. Papa Bear likes the oatmeal. How many references can I chuck out there? But for Hernandez, Matt, he had a ton of success in that fight against Quarantillo with his wrestling, with his pressure, with some of his striking. He did get tagged by the jab in the first round and got bloodied up. In the second round, the grappling was going really well. And then halfway through the second round, his hands dropped down close to his waist, and he got tuckered right out, and that was when Quarantillo was able to really just pound away.
And I've always felt like that was the story about Alexander Hernandez. It's not that he's not skilled, because he is an extremely skilled fighter. If you just break down, is he a good boxer? Well, yeah, he can jab, he has good power. Not great defensively, of course, but those are things you can work on. He has high-level wrestling. The cardio's not great, and I guess that's the thing I do want to focus on. Some fighters can fight in a very similar manner when they're tired as to when they have full cardio. They do all the same stuff. It just might not be as fast. Alexander Hernandez becomes a completely different fighter once he does become tired, though. And a lot of his stoppage losses aren't just because he's getting hit by these big bombs from the outside. If you go back to the Cowboy fight, Alexander Hernandez is burning really hot. And that's something they talk a lot about in boxing. It's, hey, are they really sweaty when they're walking out? Like, did they really get a good sweat on? Are they really hot when they get into the ring just so that they're ready for it? Hernandez is the type of guy who burns so hot at the start of the fight that you do worry about how much he's going to have left in the tank when the second and the third fight comes around. Because to give us a little bit of credit, that's what we said all week long during that Billy Q fight. It was, hey, can Hernandez go out there and out-wrestle him? Of course he can. He is the better wrestler. But is that a sustainable game plan for a guy like Alexander Hernandez, cutting an extra 10 pounds from his body? And of course it wasn't. And it'll be really interesting to see how he how he looks moving back up in weight, because, and you probably know where I'm going with this, Dan Hooker is another guy who had a very similar drop down to 145 as Alexander Hernandez. It was, hey, it's not going great for you at 155. Now, although for Dan Hooker, he had reached much higher heights than Hernandez, but you get the idea. You can't beat some of these top-level guys. Let's try to go back down and wait, and we'll see how you look. I'm going to be curious to see if that took anything extra out of Alexander Hernandez, because we talked about Anthony Pettis on one of the earlier videos on this. Anthony Pettis is fighting Roy Jones Jr. on Gamebred FC4. I can't believe that's happening, but it's a real thing. And you know what was the wild thing about Roy Jones Jr.? He went up to fight for the heavyweight title, he screwed up his body composition, and he was never the same when he came back down. I'm not saying Alexander Hernandez's weight cut will have those type of extreme effects on him, but you do worry about a guy just trying to switch weight classes and being very reactionary after all these wins.
I'll tell you what about Anthony Pettis. He's yoked for that fight, man. Sergio looks scared, but if you look at it for both of these guys from 2019 on, though, like, you consider for a guy like Hernandez, and we'll go through the wins and the losses really quick. He loses in that fight against Cowboy Cerrone, bad blood, you know, you had already alluded to the fact, like, he burned pretty hot in the fight. Then he goes out and beats Francisco Trinaldo after a little bit of a layoff. It's a hometown fight in Texas.
And Trinaldo was still 45 when that fight happened, and that fight happened 3 years ago.
The judges be the judges. He loses to Drew Dober, beats Chris Grutzmacher, loses to Moises, beats Breed, and loses to Moicano and to Quarantillo. So he beats guys you think he should beat, and he loses to guys that, listen, it's a competitive fight, and he's going to...
And that's my question for you. At this stage of Jim Miller's career, and at this stage of Alexander Hernandez's career, I still feel like Hernandez is better than the last few guys Jim Miller's beat. And that's why I don't think this is such an easy fight to predict. Because I think recent history would suggest, oh, Jim Miller, he still kind of resembles the fighter he used to. He can still take a big shot and give a big shot. Whereas Hernandez has looked somewhat brittle as of late. But I still feel like this version of Hernandez, I don't care if you have the lowest opinion of him you possibly can, he's still probably better than the version of Cowboy we saw against
and that's
Jim Miller.
it. Like, for Jim Miller, the same thing can be said as I just said for Hernandez. Now, Hernandez loses losing record. Jim Miller's 6-3 since 2019, and it bears going through because out of all of that, 3 performance bonuses and a fight of the night, he beat Jason Gonzalez, Clay Guida, Roosevelt Roberts, Eric Gonzalez, Nicholas Mata, and Donald Cerrone. And the only guy that I really didn't think he was going to beat was Nicholas Mata, the southpaw boxing on the outside. Mata's fast hands, he's got power, his nickname's Iron because he likes Mike Tyson. And all of a sudden, it's Jim Miller going out there and cold-cocking him and knocking him out. And the losses to Joe Selecki, where he got out-grappled and held, even though it was a close fight. Vince Pichel, who out-wrestled Jim Miller. And then the other losses out there, Hot Sauce Holtzman, who outstruck him from the outside. So if you do consider it, this was originally supposed to be Gabriel Benitez. Hernandez takes this fight on short notice. And it bears being said, folks, Hernandez's loss against Billy Quarantillo was December 10th. So 2 months and a week and a day since he got knocked out. Now, it was a standing TKO knockout, but his face was bloodied up. He got hit hard as it went on. I don't like guys coming off of knockout losses in like 5-6 months is good. 2 months is bad.
Well, that's the thing, too. How much time do you take off after that fight? Because, you can't take major blows to the head after you lose via TKO. At least you're not supposed to.
Swelling's got to go down.
The swelling has to go down. But, okay, so just imagine there's at least 1 week at a minimum that he has to take off. So you're dealing with less than 2 months, and he just knows that he has to take this fight within a week. There's a lot of question marks for Alexander Hernandez, and that's why it's a weird spot for him to find himself at this stage of his career. Because 4 years ago, no one really would have thought Hernandez would just sort of be this middling kind of fighter on the outside of the division, still trying to find his footing, taking a difficult fight against Jim Miller. Because it's unfortunate because Jim Miller's still really good at this stage of his career, but he has become one of these fighters who's like, okay, if you lose to me, we're going to be asking some really serious questions. Now, again, if you beat Jim Miller, it will kind of give your career a little bit of revitalization. But for Hernandez, you just wonder how far he can go at this stage. I'm really going to have to see him go out there and dominate Jim Miller for me to believe that he has a chance to become the fighter I once thought he could. Because I don't think he's on that same path anymore.
You lose to Jim Miller, you get your hair back, you get yoked, and you look like the movie star we expected out of you. At least that's what Donald Cerrone's done. But you have a look at the odds in the matchup, and Miller's the underdog. Open plus 210, plus 160 right now for Hernandez. Open minus 250, minus 190. We have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise to us, they are to you. The odds are closing into par. I'm going to say they're going to be close. I'm going to say over under 60% Hernandez.
I think they'll be over.
I think the fans are going with her. Oh, no. 128 total votes. This fight was just announced. And out of it, 69% Miller, 57% by submission for the 31% that have Hernandez, 68% by the TKO. So the fans have Miller. The odds suggest Hernandez. I like it when we get a spicy matchup like that. Matt, the thing I was going to do, Dan Tom does this, and he talks about it on his Protect Your Neck podcast, and he does it on his Twitter too. He does that Southpaw report the week of the fights, and he'll go through it and who they face as Southpaw. Alexander Hernandez against fellow Southpaws does really well. He's 3-1 in the UFC. Dariush, OAM, and Trinaldo are the wins. Trinaldo, right, yeah. And the loss is to Drew Dober. So he's done well against Southpaws in the UFC.
The OAM fight was mainly grappling, though, so the stance doesn't really matter. That's all I'll say. And I thought he lost the other one. So really, he's like 1-1-1. Again, everything points towards Alexander Hernandez should probably win this fight because he is the much younger guy. I do worry about the TKO loss he just suffered, and here's the weird thing about these fights. I'm really bad at predicting the prospect who had a lot of hype is now fighting the older guy who still has a little bit left in the tank. If the older guy has nothing left in the tank, I feel very safe saying that and stating as much. Go back and watch our Shogun videos from the last 4 years. But I do think Jim Miller has a chance in this one, and that's why I pick him. I don't think he's going to go out there and just get purely out-wrestled and purely out-grappled like we saw in the Joe Selecki matchup. I do worry about that. That is one of the primary fights that I focused on leading up to this, because I think if Hernandez is going to have success, he's probably going to avoid the striking altogether. I really don't think he wants to risk his chin against Jim Miller. I know Miller's old in his career, but he has shown the ability to still carry quite a bit of pop at this stage. So I feel like my heart might be picking a little bit too much. But again, I do think Jim Miller, he's well-rounded enough to stay away from the takedown. He still has good cardio at this stage of his career, and I do think he's the better fighter on the feet.
Is Vince Carter a Hall of Famer?
No, I don't think so.
22 seasons in the NBA. Is Jamie Moyer a Hall of Famer in baseball?
I don't think so.
Was Dave Andreychuk a Hall of Famer?
I don't even know who that is.
He is a Hall of Famer. And a Stanley Cup winner, Matt. Guys with really long longevity. Is Jim Miller a Hall of Famer in the UFC? All-time wins leader, all-time
I don't
fights
know.
leader?
It's really a question for everybody at home because you can look at it two different ways. Is the longevity enough to get you in? Like in baseball, some guys can have war seasons where they're like 3 WAR, but they do it for 20 years and it looks really good. But then other players like a Shohei Ohtani, for instance, just gets like 10 WAR every year. But you know he's not going to be able to do that for decades and decades. So I think it really comes down to what your personal preference is. For me, Jim Miller never really reached the heights I don't think that a UFC Hall of Famer should. I really think you might not have to get a UFC title, but you've at least had to challenge for it in the past. And Jim Miller, unfortunately, has never been able to do that.
I don't like picking guys that get knocked out all that recently, but I do like the fact that Hernandez is going back up to 155, and I think he can hold position on a guy like Jim Miller, like Vince Pichel was able to do. And you can draw similarities out of their game plans. Hernandez kicks more than Pichel. Pichel does not kick very much. Their boxing's very similar, and I think Hernandez can go out there, watch the tape on that, see what Pichel was able to do, and employ that game plan in a matchup like this, even on short notice. So for me, going with Alexander Hernandez, Matt going with Jim Miller, nicknames A10, the Great Ape, they are what they are. Make sure you check out our MMA nickname tier list video. Big time fights coming up this weekend. The next one on the docket, Knight versus Prachnio. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.